There are several ways we can solve this question. I think one fairly easy way is to treat the question as an overlapping sets problem. So to start, I'm going to set up an overlapping sets table. And at the top, I recognize that some people in this class scored greater than 70, which of course means that some people scored less than or equal to 70. And down the side, I recognize that some people in this class scored less than 85, which of course means that some people in this class scored a score greater than or equal to 85. And finally, to complete my table, I'm going to label the corners T for total. Now, before we go forward, one thing we should recognize about this problem is that there are no concrete numbers. Everything here is percentages, which means everything is relative. And remember, whenever there are no real values in your problem, do yourself a favor. Choose a value. And in particular, if you're working with percentages, choose 100 because percentages work really easily with 100. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pretend that there are 100 total students in this class, and I'm going to put 100 in our grand total slot. And next, if 75% of the class had scores greater than 70, I can put a 75 right here, because this spot in our table represents the total number of students with scores greater than 70. And likewise, if 60% of the class had scores less than 85, I can put a 60 right here, because this spot in our grid represents the total number of students with scores less than 85. Now, as a next step, remember when you work with overlapping sets tables, the rows add to their total, and the columns also add to their total. In other words, I know that 75 plus something equals 100. The something is 25. And I also know that something plus 60 equals 100. That something is 40. Before we complete our grid, however, I think we need to recognize one thing. It's impossible to get a score greater than or equal to 85, but simultaneously less than 70. By definition, if you score something greater than or equal to 85, it means that score is not less than 70, which means we could put a 0 right here. And if that's the case, remember again, our rows add to their total, and our columns add to their total as well. In other words, something plus 0 is 40. That something is 40. And 40 plus something is 75. That something is 35. Now, what does that 35 represent? That's the number of students who got a score less than 85, but greater than 70. At this point, remember our question. We want to know what percent of the class had scores greater than 70, but less than 85. Well, as we just saw, we have a total of 100 students. 35 of them have scores greater than 70, but less than 85. In other words, 35 out of 100 students have scores greater than 70, but less than 85. Well, 35 out of 100 is 35 over 100, which equals 35%. And there you go. That's the reason here that 35% is the correct answer.